Hi, welcome to Lesson 8 of City Vision University's Introduction to Christian Addiction Counseling course. I'm Andrew Sears, and in this lesson, we're going to talk about compassion fatigue, burnout, secondary trauma, and self-care. And just as a reminder, this course is available for free at cityvisioninstitute.org. Now, I want to talk about this because if you're going to be in the field of addiction counseling or the field of counseling, then burnout is a really high risk. About 10 years ago, whenever I was starting to experience burnout, I started to read, I must have read a ton of books and articles on burnout. And one of the things that was surprising was they all had titles like burnout in the caring professions. And whenever they talked about cases, it was all people who are counselors or, pastors or, working in medical field. And I thought that was interesting to find that out, that it's such an epidemic in this field. And I think that we want to help prepare you and expose you to some concepts that hopefully as you work in the field, then you'll learn more about these. And we have some videos that we cover and some other links that we cover in this week. But there's 4 concepts that I want to introduce you to. One of the most common concepts is the term compassion fatigue. And people who are in the caring professions, I read an article, it was, I think the headline, it was in The Onion, so it was a spoof article, but it said, "Teach for America, chews up and spits out another idealistic, young person." And it talks about this person who just basically started hating everyone because they were just so burnt out, and they came in. And I think that becomes fairly common, that, people will go in and there's, said, I'm going to be a teacher and I'm going to change people's lives. And then you see them, 20 years later, and they've kind of given up all hope. Well, that's kind of what compassion fatigue looks like. You try and then you get burned, and then you just can't love anymore. And so, there's solutions to that. But part of the reason why you get this compassion fatigue is it fails to recognize the second thing there, emotional labor. Now, the idea of labor is, there might be someone who's doing construction or lifting, heavy pallets of bricks. And that person, say they're lifting, heavy pallets of bricks all day, 100 pounds of bricks, moving them from one spot to another. No one would expect that person to work 8 hours straight without taking a break. But or maybe 10 hours or 12 hours straight without taking a break. But that's what some of us do emotionally. Like, we're doing huge Herculean tasks emotionally and working with clients, and it's extremely draining. And it's important to recognize, what emotional labor is. So that's some of the videos that we have this week to talk about that. And you can do more research on the different types of emotional labor. But if you're in counseling, you're doing a lot of emotional labor. And another concept that's important is the concept of secondary or vicarious trauma. As you're working with clients that have experienced a lot of trauma, this first came out with Army counselors, where they would be talking with soldiers who were sharing what happened with them on the battlefield, and they started to experience the signs of PTSD even though they were never on the battlefield. And that's something that is very significant. It's especially significant because one of the things I've noticed is many of the people who are in high trauma fields, who are exposed to a lot of trauma on a day-to-day basis, often have high trauma backgrounds. So myself is in this category. I was attracted to a high trauma field because I had a high trauma background, and as someone who has PTSD, working in a field that has high trauma, it's very easy for me to get re-triggered through secondary trauma or through conflict, even primary trauma, because you have a client that goes off in a completely inappropriate way, and that triggers the PTSD. And ultimately what that can do is it can also trigger a physical response that is called adrenal fatigue. And there in the field of medicine, there are 2 categories called functional medicine and integrative medicine. Now, these are science-based. This is not, hokey stuff. Both, especially functional medicine, they require that people be MDs, but they look at the body as a whole. And one of the things they've noticed is that people who are experiencing high levels of trauma, and who have this compassion fatigue and do a lot of emotional labor, they often experience this thing called adrenal fatigue. And really what it comes down to, just to give a summary of what adrenal fatigue is, it's all the chemicals and the components that your body normally uses to handle, and hormones and things along those lines to handle stress. They just get overtaxed. And in some cases, that means that components of your body, there's just not enough of these, vitamins and supplements and hormones. In other cases, your body comes up with unhealthy ways of coping with that much trauma. So you have too much cortisol, and then that has huge effects on the rest of your body. So all these are important concepts. I would encourage you to read a lot more about that. So one of the things we're going to have you do in this week is we're going to have you come up with a holistic plan for self-care. I want to show kind of what we mean by that. Now, you don't have to use all 4 quadrants, but what we want you to do is we want you to kind of expand. Normally people think self-care is, I need to take a day off. Well, I think it might be a little bigger than that. So, using this 4 quadrant thing, so you have this personal domain. So what are the things you could do to try to improve your self-care? Well, sometimes you're in a job that isn't a healthy work environment, or, if you have PTSD and you're in a job that, it's as healthy as possible, but you're still exposed to high amounts of trauma, can you handle that much trauma on an ongoing basis? And part of what I had to deal with myself was I used to be closer to the front lines. I used to live in a house that had bullet holes in it in the hood. And because I had PTSD, it was kind of like trying to be an NBA player in my 40s, and I couldn't, do what my younger body could do. So sometimes you have to make decisions that, I can't do some of these things. Yourself, you could go to counseling or go to life coaching, develop more healthy friendships. I moved recently, and I've been working really hard in the new place where I live to develop healthy friendship. So this develop your personal identity, that's a lot of what we do in our course, Vocation, Calling, and Purpose of Work. If you better understand yourself and you understand who God's made you to be, then that will help you do better care. Pursuing your own spiritual fulfillment, that would be living out your calling, and getting healing from wounds of abuse, going to counseling for yourself, getting connected to God, avoiding behavioral addictions. I can't overstate how common behavioral addictions are in people in counseling, because they don't do self-care. So they, will have a behavioral addiction. They'll say, well, I'm a workaholic, or I have a food addiction, or I have, this side pornography addiction. And they don't realize that what that is, you're like a tea kettle and you're boiling, and you're giving yourself more than you can handle. And this is how you're coping, right? So, and trying to, address those things. Now, in the physical quadrant, so these things are really important, and counselors often underestimate these things. So, and I'm not saying this to, make people feel guilty. I'm saying these things because I want people to be healthy. A lot of my recovery initially and my self-care was really focused on this quadrant, and I got stuck. I got stuck for like 5 years until I realized I needed to work on this quadrant. So I started eating healthier. I started exercising regularly. I learned about adrenal fatigue. I went and saw a functional medicine doctor to treat adrenal fatigue. Now, some of that is going to be eating healthy and exercising and, reducing stress and things like that. But some of it, what the doctor did with me is gave customized list of vitamin supplements that I took. And, some of you may have medication that's critical, for you to take in order to be healthy. But for me, whenever I did all those things, man, I saw more progress in a period of a year or two than I'd saw in the previous, 5 years of my own, self-care. And it was because I realized there's a whole nother quadrant to deal with. Cultural is, finding a healthy church and small group. This could also somewhat be social, but, to have a healthy culture around you, a culture that values emotion and spiritual relationships. avoiding negative cultures. So, we're around so much toxic media. So avoiding triggering tech and media use. Participate in healthy recovery or, counseling groups. And I put that to receive because many people will go to those groups and say, oh, I'm participating, but you're leading and you're not really receiving. And for people who are coming from cultural minorities, finding positive groups where you can just be in your own culture, where you don't have to, put on another face, and to have that. Or even for people who come from, white majority, but you're working in a community where you're outside of your primary culture, or you're working in a missions field where you're outside your primary culture, you need to find a space where you can just go and rest and not have to have on your cross-cultural hat at all times, right? And then societal, this quadrant on self-care, what I see so many people using this quadrant for really is, they want to change the world. They're going to be a community developer. They're going to be an economic developer. They're going to change all the laws. They're going to be a social. And this is me. I'm making fun of this because this was kind of me whenever I was younger. I was going to be a social justice warrior. But really what I was doing is I was avoiding dealing with my own stuff. I was using that to self-medicate myself because I didn't want to deal with my own pain. I just wanted to be angry at other people. And but having said that, I think, a part of the 12 steps is giving back to others, and some of it you can do in these other quadrants. But part of giving back to others is to work towards developing more just systems and laws, but to do that without burning yourself out personally, so it could be through community development organizations or other things. So in your assignment this week, we want you to come up with a holistic plan for self-care. You can borrow some of these things, but it's between you and God and kind of your own research and your own understanding of yourself, of what it is that you need to focus on now. So hopefully you'll find this helpful, and it's been great having you in this course. Please share this course with other people. The free version is available on cityvisioninstitute.org. Thanks a lot.